Thanks for joining us today. My name is Chris, and in addition to being an Airstream owner myself, I get to work with Airstream's brand ambassadors to share their stories of adventure and knowledge. Today's Ask an Airstreamer will focus on one of my favorite topics, camping on public land. And we'll hear from three sets of Airstreamers who take a slightly different approach to it. To submit your questions at any point today, go ahead and click the Q&A button at the bottom of this screen. We'll do our best to answer all of them, but if we run out of time, we'll share an email address at the end to submit your questions. Also, don't worry about writing everything down. We're recording today's session and we'll make it available on airstream.com early next week. And before kicking things off, I want to call out three quick things. Boondocking is a little bit more work than pulling into a campground and plugging in, but as you'll learn from today's discussion, the extra effort is definitely worth it. Secondly, there's a 2-question survey that will pop up after we wrap up today. We'd love your feedback so we can learn the things that you liked and things that we can do better in future editions. And finally, at the end of today's session, we'll share a promo code for Airstream Supply Company, which is part magazine, part travel guide, and part outfitter. So with that out of the way, let's first talk about what boondocking is. Fundamentally, boondocking is camping without being connected to water, electricity, or sewer. Other terms that you'll hear to describe this are dry camping, dispersed camping, primitive camping, and wild camping, but they all mean the same thing. And why is boondocking so awesome is most sites don't require a reservation. If anyone's ever tried to grab a reservation in summertime at Yosemite, with 2 million annual visitors and just under 500 campsites, it can be a little tough. So today we'll show you how to get around that. Also, it's some of the best views that you can find. These are the views that you'll usually find on marketing brochures or in the front of websites. And then thirdly, it's more space, more peace and solitude that you'll ever find in a campground. So let's talk about what we're going to cover today on slide number 4. So first and foremost, we'll hear from folks who are doing this today. So 3 groups of people who are out camping either on the weekends or full-time doing this. We'll cover how to plan and how to know where to go. And then we'll also talk about how to have a great experience once you're there. And then most importantly, we'll answer questions along the way. And to give you a little bit of context on the experience that our group has today, cumulatively in the last 4 years, they have covered 222,000 miles, so about 9 times around the Earth. So a lot of great experience from this group. Excited to introduce them to you. First up, we have Jonathan and Ashley. They're full-time boondockers in their 1972 Airstream land yacht. When not working or homeschooling on the road, they and their 4 kids are always seeking new experiences and adventures outside the ordinary. Nina and Eric live in Chinle, Arizona, which is set in the heart of the Navajo Nation. This desert town might seem like the middle of nowhere to some, but for these 2 physicians, Chinle is the center of a world built on community service and outdoor adventure. These weekend warriors are always ready for adventure with their 2 small kids. And finally, Cass Beach, who's an intrepid traveler roaming the country solo in her Airstream base camp, going whichever the way the wind blows. For her, making the decision to live full-time on the road was a natural progression in a lifestyle driven by wanderlust. So excited to hop in and share some knowledge and experience. Jonathan and Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you are and what you're up to?
Sure thing. So back in 2016, 17, we bought a 1972 vintage Airstream. We had been in a huge fifth wheel and had an experience where we got to actually boondock and camp off grid in that fifth wheel, and it kind of changed everything for us, right? So we just fell in love with the solitude and the views and the wide open spaces and sort of the freedom, and we knew we had to switch rigs. So we sold the fifth wheel, we bought a vintage Airstream, and we gutted it and renovated it specifically for camping off grid. So stuff like solar and lithium batteries, compost and toilet lift kit, extra gray water storage tank, internet setup, stuff like that. So after that, we spent the next several years traveling all over the country, Mexico, Canada. We boondocked a ton. We really learned how to live off-grid and really fell in love with it so much that this last year we actually bought some off-grid property out in Southeast Arizona, where we are currently living in the Airstream, boondocking off-grid, and building a homestead from scratch. So the Airstream is definitely our tiny shiny home. That's what we call it. And we actually have 4 kids, so there's 6 of us inside the Airstream. And like I said, we've been all over. Our favorite boondocking spot is Trona Pinnacles, which is out in California. You can probably see a little picture there, but it's such a like otherworldly location. There's hardly anybody out there. It's very difficult to get to, but it's just absolutely gorgeous, and we just love the solitude out there.
Awesome. Thanks, Jonathan. Yep. Nina and Eric, over to you.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for having us today. I'm Eric Ritchie, and this is my wife, Nina Ritchie, and we're both physicians here on the Navajo Nation. We moved here to Chinle, Arizona in 2012, and at the time, being outdoors was just a big adventure for us and a way for us to recharge after spending a lot of busy time taking care of patients in the hospital. And so we spent a lot of time tent camping all over the Four Corners area in Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, and Utah. And when our little ones came along, that lifestyle got a little bit harder. And especially when our second kid under 2 came into our lives, we realized that tent camping and car camping and backpacking was going to be really difficult for us in the future. And so we started looking for a trailer that would accommodate our needs. And lo and behold, a pharmacist that was working with us in the hospital had an Airstream parked in the driveway just across the street from us. And it had been there for a long time. It had never moved. We saw it all the time and didn't think much of it. But at the time, it was the perfect size for us. It's a 19-foot, 2005 International Bambi. We can tow it with our Toyota 4Runner. So we didn't have to buy a new tow vehicle to accommodate it. And it's just the right size for our family of 4. Our 2 little boys can sleep in the front dinette. We've got the corner bed in the back. And it's really opened up a whole other world of adventure with our children, where we're able to continue to travel all over the Four Corners area and beyond. In a typical year, we'll head out on any given weekend to any of the number of different national parks and monuments that are within a short drive from our home in Chinle. And then we usually do 2 or 3 longer road trips every year where we'll go through multiple states and see multiple different sites. Probably our favorite boondocking site is one of the first places that we boondocked, when we took the first big multi-state road trip in our Airstream when our kids were very small, and went out to California and through Death Valley and ultimately ended up in the Alabama Hills. This place just blew us away with the beauty of the Eastern Sierra Nevadas and the rock formations that the kids could explore in that place. And it really just won our hearts over to boondocking, because we realized how much fun we could have with our kids just being in a location that was isolated from others, where there was room for them to roam and lots of activities for them to explore. So that's really why we love boondocking. And I think for us, especially during this COVID-19 pandemic, we've been very busy at the hospital, and boondocking's taking on a whole new meaning as we try to socially distance ourselves during our travels. So it's become our main mode of camping now.
Awesome. So from full-time with Jonathan and Ashley to part-time with Nina and Eric, and then back to full-time with Cass in her base camp. Welcome, Cass.
Thank you, Chris. Hi, everybody. So I am a full-time remote employee for a large insurance carrier. So I have your standard 9-to-5 job. And about 3 years ago, I started traveling in between Airbnbs and really got that joy of traveling. And that ended up moving me into the full-time RV life. Bought the base camp. I bought it because it was an off-road trailer. I really wanted to do this kind of camping. And then as soon as I bought the base camp, I was way too scared to take it off the road. I had no idea how to boondock. I thought my tanks were way too small to boondock. So I stayed in RV parks. Thankfully, I ran into a friend along the way, and she has the same size tanks as I do. And she said, you know, I boondocked for 2 weeks. You can absolutely do it. And she really helped me and guided me through the process of how to boondock. And I started actually in the Texas Panhandle. So it's not the most glorious boondocking out there, but there's still some gorgeous parks. And you were close enough to civilization that if something went terribly wrong, you could still get back and fix it. But boondocking ended up being a lot easier than I thought it would be. And it was amazing how freeing it was. You didn't need those reservations anymore. You don't have to worry about finding an RV park anywhere. And with working a full-time schedule, I can go from sites, I can move whenever I want. So you're not stuck with an 11 a.m. checkout time right in the middle of the workday or anything like that. And then when you start heading more west, the views and the areas that you can get to when you start boondocking is incredible. You can just wake up with mountains surrounding you, and it's honestly addicting. So once I started boondocking, I became, for the most part, a full-time boondocker. Once in a while, I'll still go back to an RV park or a friend's house, hook the tanks up so I can do a thorough cleaning of the base camp, but then we head straight back out to the mountains or the deserts. One of my favorite areas, it's a very popular area, you'll see the picture down below, but it's the Upper Teton view. And you're literally on a plateau that overlooks the Grand Tetons. So you just wake up in the morning and the entire Teton Range is right outside your window. It is absolutely incredible. If you go in the summertime, it'll be really busy. I have shown up on a Friday in the summer. You can still find a spot. It might not be the best spot, but you could still find one. But if you go before or after the summer season, so after Labor Day or before Memorial Day, you can stay up there for 2 weeks and it's absolutely incredible.
Awesome. So I know that everyone's wondering, like, how do I find these places and how do I plan where to go? So I know that each of you have your own approaches. So let's first start with Jonathan and Ashley. When you look at scouting out places where to go and putting together a plan, tell us how you use technology to do that.
Sure, yeah. So we also work from the road and our kids homeschool, and so we need internet. So in that sense, internet is definitely one of the things we look for when we're trying to find a spot. And I know off-grid and internet doesn't necessarily sound like it goes together, but there's a lot of people out there that are traveling full-time and do still need to work. And so thankfully there are resources like Campendium that actually sort of catalog that internet signal and will tell you if there are, which carrier has good signal there and which don't. And also lots of other great things in the comments, like where you might find water, what the weather might be like, where you can go dump, what the road is like coming in, and if your rig is going to fit, stuff like that. So yeah, it's kind of all about that research and trying to plan ahead and having a few options in case something goes wrong. But yeah, for us, for our family, we have to make sure there's internet, we're going to be able to get in safely, and that we'll be semi close to some sort of place to get supplies.
Awesome. Nina and Eric, what about you? What's your overall approach to finding a site?
Yeah, so we're really lucky because we live in a place where we can go back to some of the same national forests and public lands over and over again. So a lot of times, the first time that we're exploring an area, we might choose to stay in a designated campground or an area that's really familiar to us, where we can get reservations and it's easy to plan things. And then while we're there, we'll try to scout the area, do a little reconnaissance, figure out which roads we could potentially get our trailer down, where some of the best views are. And that just gives us a little bit of familiarity so we don't get stuck in a location where we might have trouble turning around or where we don't think we can go any further with our trailer behind us. We also use a lot of different apps, and I think we're going to talk more about apps later in the presentation, but we like apps like Dirt and Allstays because they tell us a little bit about where we can get water, where we could dump our tanks, as well as just different dispersed campgrounds and established campgrounds that are nearby. One strategy that we try to use when we're going on longer trips is we'll often start our trip with one night in a campground with full hookups in the vicinity of where we're trying to boondock. And that gives us an opportunity to fill our tanks, take a nice long shower, maybe get a bite to eat at a restaurant, and then we're ready the next day to head out into the wilderness and try to find that perfect boondocking site with plenty of time on our hands. The other thing we always try to do when we go out boondocking is make sure we got a couple of solid backup options, because like Cass said, depending on the area you're going to and the time of day that you're arriving, some boondocking areas can still get quite crowded, especially during this time when a lot of people are trying to get outdoors and socially distanced by camping. And so we try to make sure we got 2 or 3 other places we could go if our prime boondocking site gets locked out.
Yeah, I think, one of my biggest fears is, especially in the West, and I'm spent a lot of time in Seattle in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of our boondocking is in, down forest roads. And one of my biggest fears is going up a road and having to manage backing up 30-foot trailer and a truck and all that. So the planning is really helpful. I'll often use satellite image of Google Maps to get an idea of, okay, is there a turnout if I get to this spot, or even looking for, because you can zoom in close enough and you can find other RVs in the satellite view, so you know that, okay, other people have made it there, it's okay. So just another tool along the way. Cass, what about you when you're planning?
So I plan my travel based on different events or festivals or visiting friends, family. And so I kind of use my calendar to plan which direction I'm going to head. And then down on the bottom, you'll see a Google map view with all the pins. I use a lot of pins to help me plan as well. So the green is places that I want to go. The yellow and the hearts are places that I've been. And then the blue is either places that I've spent the night, and you can put notes when you use those blue pins. So you can note if the road was easy to get into, if there's a good cell signal, things like that. Or I also pin when people mention really good boondocking spots. So if I'm talking to another boondocker and they're like, hey, you got to check out this area, I'll pin it on my map. That way, when I'm planning on going somewhere, I can pull up my Google map. That's my first place I go, and I can see if there's an area around there that I know there's good boondocking with cell signal that somebody recommends. If I don't have that, then I use Campendium, which we'll get into a little more detail on that in a few minutes. But it's really great to read the reviews like Jonathan was saying. And then I also use aerial view on Google, which is really important because I travel alone and I don't want to get stuck and try to have to back down by myself. So I always pick out where the different sites are that I want to go via the satellite view. Where is a good turnaround spot? So sometimes you'll see a really good turnaround spot and then the road will keep going for a couple miles. And I'll know that that turnaround spot is my end. So if I have to unhitch the trailer at that turnaround spot and then keep scouting in just the forerunner, I can potentially do that. But I'm not going to keep going down that road further with the trailer attached so I don't get stuck. So I actually use a lot of Google in my planning to really kind of have eyes on the ground before I get there.
Awesome. A quick question came in. Jonathan, start with you guys. How long is each of your Airstreams? Jonathan?
Ours is 31 foot. And then like you said, plus a 20-foot truck, you got about 50 feet you got to deal with. So yeah, you definitely want to drop it before you get too far back in anywhere.
Okay. And Cass, your base camp is 16 feet, 18 feet?
16 feet.
Okay. And Nina and Eric, how long is your camp?
We're 19 feet.
Okay. So just as we're talking, folks trying to frame the experience as you're sharing stories. A couple just follow-up questions based on this one. Maybe Cass, start with you. And I know we'll talk safety at the end, but how secure do you feel when you're out boondocking? Any issues there?
I've never had any issues boondocking. I can tell you I have a fear of the dark. So when I'm boondocking, I don't go outside at night in the dark by myself. So I'm usually in bed by the time the sun goes down and up when the sun comes up. But for the most part, you feel completely safe. When you're out boondocking, you're kind of in the middle of nowhere. So in terms of people versus animals, I mean, it's going to be really rare that people are driving 20 miles out into the middle of nowhere to do anything terrible, So I've only ever met amazing people boondocking. People are usually extremely friendly. They have great stories, and I actually love running into people and meeting people when I'm boondocking. In terms of animals, I've never had anything major come up to the RV. I have had coyotes around it, but they're really skittish. If you even just slam the Airstream door, they run off. I've never had bears or anything crazy like that with me. I do carry bear spray in the RV just in case a bear ever comes up, but I've never had that happen even up in Montana and Wyoming.
Awesome. On the next slide, I thought this was great as we were pulling this presentation together. Each of you has your own site criteria selection, right? So as you're going through and evaluating these different sites, because there are thousands and thousands of them, this baseline I thought was really helpful. And we don't have to read it. We can just kind of glance at the screen for a minute, but looking at things like, okay, how close are we to town? Cell phone and connectivity, very important. We'll talk about how to really evaluate that before you get there. But how's the road in? Again, we'll talk about that. But as you go to look and create your own boondocking criteria, having a list is really helpful. So as you're trying to eliminate sites or really focus on ones that you think will work, this is really helpful. So let's dig into some details and specifics on the different apps that folks use. First up is Campendium. It's been referenced a few times here. Jonathan, I'll let you start, and Cass, I know you have some background there to add as well.
Well, actually, I think Cass was going to start this one, and then I was going to talk about the sort of additional options if you're a supporter.
Yeah, let's do that. Cass, you're up.
Yeah, sure. So Campendium has a free version, which is an online website or an iOS app. I don't think they have an Android app as of yet, but Jonathan, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, they don't.
Okay, so they do have the free version. You can access all the information in terms of reviews, cell phone coverage, things like that on the free version. If you are a supporter, then you can actually filter by cell signal, which I am a supporter, so I can filter by that, which is really great. So I just plug in where roughly I'm going, and then I start using the filters. You can use the free filter, the public lands filter, and then the cell phone coverage filter, depending on which carrier you have. They do have AT&T, Verizon, Sprint, etc. And then you'll see where the dump stations are, the different land in there, the public land. And the reviews are really what I love about Campendium. People are very specific in their reviews. So they'll talk about the road in, they'll talk about the safety. So that's one of the big things I keep an eye out. If somebody says this place was a little bit odd, I felt weird going in here, things like that, I cross it right off my list. And then some people are extremely detailed, and they literally put in there, this is the hotspot I was using, this is the internet speeds I was getting, this is the booster I was using. So it is a really good app to use to get a lot of user feedback and really kind of have that information before you hit the road. There's also a lot more really cool features that they're just coming out with, and Jonathan will touch a little bit on that.
Yeah, so if you are a supporter of Campendium, they've added a few pretty cool features pretty recently. I think these are only available on the desktop right now, like on the website, and not in the iOS app yet. But basically, if you're a supporter and you've searched for Grand Tetons and you see the map, you got the list down the side with all the campgrounds that would be there, and then you've got the spots on the map. Over on the right, you can actually pop out some map overlays, and you can show actual like AT&T coverage for that entire map, or Verizon coverage for that entire map. They also have public land overlays. They've got hiking trail overlays. So if you're trying to plan, or even because a lot of times you might see a boondocking spot that's marked on the map in Campendium, but if you can actually see where all the public land is around it, there's a lot more options there that may just not be listed yet. And so it can give you a good idea of, okay, maybe if I end up here, maybe down the road there's still something available. I might have to go scout it, but it's possibly there. So those map overlays can be really, really handy, especially if you're doing a lot of planning and trying to find spots.
Yeah, I've often tried to zero in on a spot and then go separately to a carrier's website and then try to find the exact pinpoint on the spot and on the carrier's map. And like, is there Verizon coverage here? I don't know. So it's a handy tool to be able to overlay and have the context for the spots as you're doing your planning. Nina and Eric, tell us a little bit about another tool out there called the Dirt.
Sure. So, our camping's a little bit different since we are mostly going over the weekends, and we're actually looking for places that don't have cell service or connectivity, because we're trying to unplug and not have distractions and not be reachable at work when we have time off. So some of the apps that we use are tailored towards finding places that are really off the grid and have features that we can use offline. Because a lot of times as we start getting closer to an area that we've researched either on apps like the Dirt or Campendium or Allstays, as we're getting closer to those destinations, our cell service is going to drop. And so what's really helpful about an app like the Dirt is that we can download maps to use offline. So once that cell service has disappeared and we're out in the middle of nowhere, essentially, and we can't Google things, recalibrate if we're getting lost, it's really great to have maps that we've already downloaded that we can kind of track our progress on and find where we're going. So that's what's really helpful about the dirt. And I don't know if you want us to also talk about, I think Allstays is the next app that we use often. We can research campsites, and it's great. You can pull up an area and it'll just populate all the different campgrounds, whether they are established or if they're dispersed, boondocking, even off the grid. And also it'll pull up features like places you can dump, places you can fill, places you can get propane. So that we really like that feature of Allstays, because you just find an area, it'll bring up all the options. Because oftentimes when we're driving out and we're trying to figure out, oh gosh, are we going to be able to fill our tanks, or it looks like we're running low on propane, it's really nice to be able to pull that up and plan where you need to stop.
Awesome. A couple questions here coming in, specifically related to size. So I don't know, Jonathan, I know that your Airstream is on the larger end of what Airstream makes at 31 feet. And then Cass, you're at the smaller end at 16. Have you guys had any issues in terms of getting into spots or maneuverability with those awesome places that we've all seen pictures of in this presentation? The question is advantages or disadvantages when it comes to size. Has there been any insight there you could share?
Oh, we've definitely gotten stuck. Yeah. Because we're really long. And I think if you can go smaller, absolutely, you're way more maneuverable. We really wanted a 27 foot, but we just couldn't make it work with 6 people. So it's a little small. But I think part of it too is just, I know it's a pain, but like drop the trailer before you get back in there. The only times we've ever gotten stuck are the times where we're like, oh, I think we can make it. And we couldn't make it. So yeah, for longer rigs, definitely drop it. And I think there's even been like some regular campgrounds, like in some, old state parks and stuff like that, where we've even had trouble getting into. Cause again, by the time you add a 20-foot truck and a hitch and a 31-foot Airstream, there's only so far you can go when you're backing that up without running into stuff sort of on the other side of the road. So yeah, if you can go smaller, do it.
And for the 16 foot, I love the size. I actually wouldn't get anything bigger because of how maneuverable it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually never gotten stuck. So the one time that I was close to getting stuck, I was going up Shadow Mountain outside of the Tetons. It was a different spot. And I was surrounded by vans. There's nobody else up there with an RV other than vans. And the road was getting really rough and really steep. So I needed to turn around. And with the rear departure angle on the base camp and how small I am, I was able to pull between 2 trees. I just backed in between the 2 trees, turned around, and went down the road. So it was a little scary doing it, but you are very maneuverable with something small. So the only downside is you have a lot less room on the inside, but boondocking, I find I'm outside most of the time anyway. I have the table, chairs outside. So for me, the small size is amazing.
Awesome. Jonathan, tell us about, we have two more tools to focus on in terms of planning. This first one is Boondockers Welcome. What's that one about?
Yeah, so since we were traveling full time, there are a lot of areas of the country that just don't have free camping, right? And there's a lot of stuff on the East Coast where there's just not as much public land or BLM land or stuff like that. So we started looking to some other options, right? Other places, things we could sort of add to our tool belt. So we came across a couple of things. Boondockers Welcome is the first one. And so Boondockers Welcome is, it's just a membership where basically there are people all over the country who open up their homes or, some land on the property that they own for you to come and camp. And it's not like a long-term thing, this isn't a situation where you're going to go stay a week or two at somebody's house. It's usually just for a couple of nights, maybe just even one night. But it's really cool because you end up meeting these awesome people who are usually travelers themselves and who just kind of love this lifestyle, and they've got extra space on their property. And so like, yeah, come out and hang out with us. And, some of them even let you hook up, like if you need power or water. I do recommend though, if you're doing it in the summer or the winter and you're having to like run your air conditioner or your heater, you should, pay them a little bit for that electricity. But yeah, Boondockers Welcome is a really cool way to kind of, if you're going somewhere or you need to stop overnight, trying to get somewhere else, it's a really good option. And Harvest Host is the next one, and it's the same kind of thing, but the difference is it's like wineries and farms and breweries and businesses rather than an actual person's house. Same kind of thing. You pay for a membership. You have to kind of like schedule it beforehand. You're not going to stay a week or two, just a couple of nights. The big difference is that on top of that membership, they want you to buy something at that business when you're there. So it can get a little expensive. A bottle of wine isn't cheap. It could be cheaper to stay in a campground. But if you like the experience, I mean, some of the places we've been were just gorgeous, the properties that these businesses own. So this two kind of options, I guess, especially if you're in an area where there's not a lot of boondocking, or you're trying to get from one place to the next and you don't want to stay in a Walmart parking lot overnight.
Awesome. The next slide, when I learned this, I was like, oh yeah, of course this is true. But a lot of the places that we're talking about aren't just beautiful places in the middle of nowhere. They're often near national parks. And a lot of the national parks, as we've illustrated here with this map of California, were actually carved out of national forests. So in the red circle, you'll see Yosemite National Park. And then to the north and the south, you'll see national forests that surround it, which have tons of places to go camping. So I've been lucky enough in the winter to actually snag a spot in Yosemite Valley, and then I went back a summer later, and it was impossible to get a reservation. And I ended up staying for 2 weeks with another Airstreamer. So we had a little setup with a couple of Airstreams in the national forest that's just to the north. So we were able to get a spot with cell phone coverage for 2 weeks, beautiful view, about 15 minutes from one of the gates in Yosemite. So really awesome way to look at experiencing the parks outside of the 500 campsites that are inside Yosemite. And I want to bring home an important point here. We've talked a lot about tools and apps that have reviews, so a lot of great resources, but nothing's better than boots on the ground. So here is a screenshot of the national forest that I camped at outside of Yosemite. On the bottom of the screenshot, kind of out of view here, is the contact information. So every public land agency that we've talked about, National Forest, BLM, Army Corps, all have districts and folks who work to maintain the roads and do different administrative tasks in that district. So I've often just picked up the phone and called and said, oh, I want to, trying to go to this part of your district. I have a 27-foot trailer and a pickup truck. Where can I go with a view or near water? And usually you get transferred to the person who maintains the roads in that district. And so they know that area like the back of their hand, and they're able to give you great knowledge on what's the road conditions like. Is there cell phone coverage back there? So using the boots on the ground approach, I think is really important. So we've talked a lot about how to find that magical spot to go spend a weekend or a week. We're going to talk a little bit now about what do we do once we get there. And so every panelist here has a slightly different approach. We have Cass, who will do 7 to 14 days in terms of when you go somewhere, how long do you stay? We have Nina and Eric, who will do kind of their weekend trips at about 3 days, and then Jonathan and Ashley, who are full-time, and then still that 7 to 14 day limit. So I first want to talk about water management. So when you're out in the middle of nowhere and you've carried all the water that your Airstream can take, some tips and tricks to not run out of water along the way. So Jonathan, I'll toss it over to you to talk about kind of your approach when you guys are out camping to conserve water, and then also kind of manage your tanks. Yeah,
sure. So one of the biggest things we did was install a composting toilet. It's RV toilets are pretty water efficient, but you'd be surprised how much water you can save by not having to use a bunch of it when you flush the toilet every time. Especially with 6 people, we saved a lot of water when we switched to a composting toilet. The other thing is you're probably going to take less showers. You may be a little bit stinky, but you're out in the middle of nowhere, so it's okay. However, there are some like third-party shower heads that you can get. I think we've got the Oxygenics and EcoCamel listed here, and they both basically do the same thing. They have a little spot on them that sucks it sucks air in while it's running the water, and so it actually increases the water pressure. So it actually feels a little bit more like a regular shower would at your house, but it uses less water because it's infusing it with air. So that's a good way to save on water. Navy showers, learning how to take a quick shower where you just kind of get wet, turn it off, soap up, rinse it off. Things like Epic wipes, which are they're big like wet wipes with essential oils infused in them. So you can just kind of wipe it down and clean off and get all the dirt off without having to use a bunch of water. And then learning how to wash your dishes in a very, efficient way where you're not cranking the water on every single time. You just trickle it out, get it wet. It's the same thing as a Navy shower. So there's lots of different ways that you learn really quick how to conserve that water, especially when you're kind of limited to what's in your fresh tank. We also, if we really need a long shower, we can always go to a hotel, or you can even go to a campground and pay them $5 or $10, and you can use their showers if you really want to get a long hot shower. Truck stops too, although we don't really recommend it. We've done it in a pinch. But yeah, that's how we save water.
Awesome. Cass, what's your strategy?
So like Jonathan said, so trickle water when doing dishes. So that's a big water saver right there. And then for the shower, I do have a shower shutoff valve. So the RV shower heads, when you use the shutoff valve that comes with them, there's always a trickle. And that trickle surprisingly uses a lot of water. So this is just a simple $5, $10 shutoff valve that you attach to the shower head. And it fully shuts off the water. The other thing that I do is I only heat up my hot water tank to a comfortable shower temperature instead of heating it up all the way. So in the base camp, that's about 20 minutes. And then I have the perfect temperature water. That means when I go in the shower, I only have to turn on the hot water. I don't have to try to mix hot and cold water and waste a whole bunch of water doing that. And so I just turn it on, use that shutoff valve to control the water flow, and you can take a decent shower. You're not going to have the water running, but in terms of you turn it on, you wet down, the Navy shower kind of thing, suds up, and then rinse off. I'm actually the opposite. I have to shower every single day, otherwise I don't feel human. So even when boondocking, between the shower shutoff valve and then the Oxygenetics head, I can shower every single day. And it's amazing how little water you can use and how satisfying the shower can become once you get used to it. And then the other thing that I do so I don't run out of water is I carry 2 plastic jugs. One's a 3-gallon, one's a 6-gallon. So I've got 9 gallons total. And when I'm at a dump station refilling my freshwater tank, I refill those as well, and I leave them in the truck. That way I always have a backup water supply. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere and all of a sudden you're out of water, you still have the 9 gallons extra. And then it's really easy to drive into town. I can take those into a Walmart or a grocery store, fill them up, and it's a really easy way to keep my water filled.
Awesome. I know too, whenever folks are with you on trips, there's always this conversation that happens at the beginning around this very topic, right? The last thing you want is someone wanting to help clean up after dishes and the faucet's running and you're out of water. So good advice all around. Nina and Eric, what are some of the ways that you conserve water?
Yeah, we don't, since we're only, camping for probably a long weekend, and even if we do a longer trip, we're, trying to do the boondocking location for about 3 days and then go and fill up and then resume another boondocking location for another 3 days. So we don't shower during that 3-day window of boondocking. So that automatically conserves water. And then much, as already been mentioned, with the approach of like trickling the water just a little bit to get the dishes wet, soap them up, and then like rinse them real quickly. I don't know if you have anything
Yeah, I
else to
think
add.
we're just lucky because we're not trying to stretch it for a really long period of time. So we can actually be a little more generous with our water when we're on these shorter trips and be a little more comfortable. A lot of water low.
Another piece of this too, on the next slide is the tank management and what to do with the holding tank. So I know that on slide 25 there's a Campendium has some really great links to dump sites. All Stays also has some really great links to dump sites. Jonathan mentioned earlier going to nearby campsites and going for a shower. You can also do the same thing when you need to dump your tanks and just pop in, pay $5 even if you're not staying there, and use their dump tank. I've also seen folks, and you can see them on Amazon and at camping supply stores, the portable tanks that if you're brave to put all that stuff in there and haul it someplace else. I have not done that yet, but that's another option. And this other one, which is actually my favorite, is on the previous slide, is finding the folks who service either the portable toilets in the area or the pit toilets in the national park, and actually have them come to you. So this is, that slide there was someone coming up to where we parked in the national forest outside Yosemite. We paid them $30. They emptied the waste tanks for both the Airstreams we had parked on this little ridge, and we didn't have to worry about hitching up and driving down the road and coming back and all of that. So that's another great option too. So we've talked a lot about water and tank management. We'll have a discussion really now around power and how to ensure that really your batteries are topped up in this situation, because you're not connected to a power pedestal. And a lot of questions that we'll get to coming in around generators and air conditionings and all that. But I just wanted to do a quick overview here of the three different folks who are joining us today. So Cass is in a base camp, 320 watts of solar total. So a mix of 160 watts on the roof, 160 watts in a portable panel that you can plug into the front. Lithium, so 200 amp hours of lithium battery, and then a 2000 watt inverter. So Jonathan and Ashley have a little bit more real estate on the roof, 31 feet to play with. So they have 900 watts of solar with 500 on the roof alone, 400 amp hours of lithium batteries, and a 2000 watt inverter. And we'll talk about kind of this in a bit, but a generator too as a backup. And then Nina and Eric have 150 watts of solar, and then the standard AGM batteries that came with their Airstream. So a little bit about some through lines here. Obviously everyone has solar. The more solar the better, but on the previous slide we'll kind of just dig into some tips and tricks when you guys are out camping. So maybe Jonathan, Ashley, start with you on types of things you do to kind of conserve energy and make sure the lights don't go dark.
Yeah, well, the nice thing is that when we renovated our Airstream, we kind of basically rethought the whole power system to be low power intentionally. So almost everything runs off the batteries. Almost everything is 12 volt and or propane. We have two breakers, one for the plugs and one for the air conditioner, which actually I think is what came standard in the 71 or the 72 model. There were only two breakers. We used the original ones. So, for us, I think we installed a remote switch for the inverter to shut it off at night because it draws a little bit of power. We also installed a remote switch to turn off all our internet gear at night because it doesn't use a ton of power either. But if it's just running all night, it's kind of wasted energy. Other than that, we just keep an eye on it because, as our kids have grown and as we've sort of moved into working more online, we're charging computers more, we're charging iPads more. We have a lot more devices and things. We've gotten larger blenders and stuff, so we've had to upgrade a few things along the way, but always just keeping sort of in mind what's our overall power usage. We make sure that we're not going past it. We used to have 700 watts of solar. We just added another 200 just because we are using more. And we want to make sure we stay ahead of that to where we're filling up every single day and we're not losing power each day.
great advice. Cass, what about you? What's your approach?
So the base camp, thankfully, is a very simple unit. So you don't have a TV or any crazy appliances or anything like that. So the power draw itself on the base camp is pretty low. All the lights are LEDs, things like that. The hot water, the heater, the stove, everything is propane. So I use everything on propane. And then I did install a couple 12-volt plugs, and my work laptop, as well as my hotspots, I actually charge everything off 12 volt. So even though I have a massive inverter, I only turn it on maybe once a day to run the blender. And then if I really need to charge things up faster, I'll plug the inverter in, because the inverter does charge like your computer and things faster than the 12 volt does, just slightly. So once in a while I'll have to turn it on, but for the most part, I've wired everything up to run just off the 12 volt. And I'm actually, in a way, 80% unless I've had a lot of consecutive days of cloudy weather or rain. So I just keep things simple. Like Jonathan said, it's a habit now that you turn things off when you're not using it. So when I'm not using the Wi-Fi, I turn all of the hotspots off, turn my laptops off. I don't use sleep mode. I don't keep them plugged in. I turn everything completely off, put it away. And that really can help save the power.
Awesome. And I think you dropped out for a second there, around the 80%. So you're saying that with the solar, no generator, being mindful of the power that you use, you usually don't drop below 80%.
That's right. Yeah.
That's
Yep.
awesome.
With the lithiums. Yep.
That's awesome. And then how about Nina and Eric, anything that you guys take? I know slightly different with being weekend warriors, but any tips you want to share?
Yeah, so we try to keep it simple too. We don't have an inverter. We're running everything off the batteries. In terms of food prep, we try to do everything off of propane, so we're not using a lot of power there. Our fridge is two-way, so it runs off of propane too. So if we picked our campsite well, we really just don't use a lot of power while we're gone. What few devices we do have, we try to prioritize charging those in the car to the extent we can. So a lot of times we'll find a beautiful spot, but we'll want to do a little driving tour of the area, or maybe drive around to a hiking trail or something like that. Always make sure we're charging as many devices as possible when we're in the car, so we don't have to charge those off the trailer batteries later. And then the other thing, this gets back to site planning a little bit, but we really try to pay a lot of attention to the temperatures in the places that we're going, and try to make sure that we're going to places as comfortable as possible. So we have to use as little power as possible for climate control. And that really matters the most around heat. When we first purchased our trailer, one of the things we were most excited about was the idea that this was going to dramatically expand our camping season, and we would go boondocking places in the wintertime that we normally would in tent camp. We found out real quick your heater can drain your batteries pretty fast overnight. And so we now try to be a little bit more judicious about our heat use. And because we're in this area that's sort of on the Colorado Plateau, we kind of have the luxury of going down in altitude if it's going to be too cold in a place, or going up in altitude if it's going to be too hot. So we really try to pay attention to elevation when planning our sites. Awesome.
That's good advice. On this next slide, we just wanted to give an overview of what comes standard from a solar standpoint, what's pre-wired, how do we try to make it easy for folks to add it in the future, and then also talk a little bit about Airstream's Power Plus product, which is a lithium drop-in battery solution for model year 2021 and newer. So in terms of vehicles that come with standard already on the roof, ready to go, so that anything that has a motor, the Atlas and the Interstate both have solar on the roof, and then the Airstream Classic does as well. And then things that are pre-wired for solar, that means the hard work of running the cables that are in the roof of the Airstream back down to where it needs to connect to the batteries and the solar charger. That work is already done in all of the other models. And then every Airstream model also has a plug in the front. You've seen in some of the pictures today for the portable panels that you can actually connect to the front of an Airstream and use to charge your batteries that way. So lots of options. The dealers are well versed in adding this. So even if you have one that comes with it, you want to add more, some expertise that you can lean on there. And just to wrap up this section, and we'll start to dig into some more questions here in a minute. Some tips, just to recap. You'll see that the folks who are doing this full time have made the upgrade to lithium. And I think one of the biggest, changes there is there are advantages there is that you have more usable energy that you can actually get from the batteries. So big game changer there. Considering the use of a portable solar panel. So even if you have some on the roof, having one separate that allows you to move and position around, perhaps out of the shade, is always helpful. And a lot of discussion around site planning, like, hey, if we pick the right spot, we're actually won't be too hot or too cold. But if you're ever in a situation where you can, looking at different elevations, if there are any pilots in the group here, there's a formula that pilots use to figure out what's the temperature decrease as you go up in altitude. Same applies to this. So for every 1,000 feet you go up in altitude, it gets 3.5 degrees Fahrenheit cooler. So if you have an option, the higher you get, the more comfortable it will be. Or if you don't want to be too cold, going to the bottom of the valley will also keep you warmer. Consider a small generator as a backup if you have a couple cloudy days. Always helpful. And I think either if we're talking about water or even electricity, you don't have to drive out in the middle of nowhere to go test this. You could go to an established campsite with all the hookups and all the things and actually do a trial run of this and just unplug everything there and get a sense of what that experience is going to be like with just relying on your water tanks or just relying on your batteries and your inverters to keep things going. So great way to do a dry run instead of getting out in the middle of nowhere. Quick conversation on safety coming up next. And I know that this is a big consideration for folks as you go far away from civilization. Nina and Eric, can you tell us a little bit about your approach to safety and what you guys do?
Like Cass said earlier, we really have not had a lot of issues with safety in the places that we've traveled and boondocked. We also try to scour locations ahead of time so we know what we're getting ourselves into. We look at reviews ahead of time so we know that other people have been there and had a good time. And then we're also kind of planning sites that are going to be kid friendly. And so oftentimes the places that we're boondocking are places that are around other families too, because they've got the same site selection criteria in mind. So we generally found that that safety is just not really a huge issue for us. And most of our public lands are pretty safe. Awesome.
Cass, what about you?
So the biggest safety thing that I'm actually worried about is hurting myself and being alone. So for me, I actually had a friend who had an incident, and thankfully there were friends around. So I learned from this. So first thing is I always have my cell phone or my Apple Watch on me. That way, no matter where I am, even if I'm crawling up on the Forerunner to get into my rooftop box or something like that, if I fall off and hurt myself, I don't have people around to help me. So I make sure my cell phone is on me at all times or my Apple Watch so I can call for help. If I do go out of signal, I do have the InReach Explorer that's pictured here. It is an SOS satellite device. So anywhere in the world, you can call for help either by texting a phone number. So if it's not an emergency, you can text somebody and say, hey, I have, flat tire or something, I need help, come get me. Or you can press the SOS device and that will go into a center call or a call center, kind of like 911, and they'll send in a helicopter if absolutely necessary. They'll get rangers into you. So I always have some item with me to make sure that I can contact people, whether it's with cell or with the satellite. And then in terms of regular safety, my biggest advice is just to follow your gut. I've never had an issue boondocking, but sometimes parking in Walmart parking lots for the night when you're traveling through, you pull in and there's just something off about it. It doesn't feel right. The minute you get that feeling, don't question it, just go. There are so many places out there that you can park and you can stay the night. You'll find something else and just follow your gut with that.
Awesome. And I know we have a lot of questions that we need to get to. I just want to do one more slide, 33, which talks about connectivity, because we've had a lot of questions coming in specifically about that piece of it. Cass, tell us a little bit about your approach, and then Jonathan, love to hear from you as well.
Yep. So I have an AT&T hotspot plan, I also have a Verizon hotspot plan. Sometimes you'll go find a beautiful spot, it'll have blazing fast AT&T and zero Verizon signal. So I carry both with me because that gives you more options, and then also it gives you a backup hotspot in case you're in an area, one fails, you can use the other one. With my job, I have to be connected, so that gives me the peace of mind. I do also have a WeBoost antenna that I can put up on the roof. It's not mounted permanently because I've actually found I only needed it twice. Everywhere else I've gone boondocking, the signal's been strong enough. I actually run without that antenna.
Awesome. Jonathan, what about you?
Yeah, we have a little bit more robust setup just because there's so many of us using that internet. It needs to be a little more stable and have more bandwidth. So we have a permanent WeBoost 4GX, and it's connected to external antennas on top of the Airstream, so that we can point directly at a tower or use the omnidirectional, just grab it out of the air. And that combined with, so we also have a Verizon hotspot plan and an AT&T hotspot. And I like the hotspot plans because, say you need to go into town to work, you can just pop the hotspot off the wall or wherever you keep it, take it in the car with you, go to the coffee shop, and that way you have sort of your own secure line. You're not having to rely on like Starbucks or McDonald's Wi-Fi or whatever, because it's not very secure, and it's usually not very fast either. So we have that boosting gear. For us, since we're a family, we also have a router, because as you can imagine, with so many people trying to connect to the internet, if one day we're on the Verizon hotspot and the next day we're on the AT&T hotspot, it's like mass hysteria of trying to get connected. So we have a router that we connect the hotspot to, and so everybody knows they just connect to the router, and I take care of, where are we getting internet from this week, basically.
Awesome. I know that there's some questions here. Airstream has a connected kit, which takes advantage of a larger antenna that's mounted on the roof, and then a router as well inside the vehicle. There's a screenshot here at the top that shows the current plans that are available from AT&T, but the device is open, so you could pop in a Verizon SIM if you wanted, or a T-Mobile or Sprint, depending on what you had. So lots of good questions coming in. We'll try to do rapid fire because there are a lot of them. Jonathan, just a quick question here. Have you ever looked into satellite internet? Any insight on kind of bandwidth and cost?
From what I hear, Elon Musk is working on a pretty cool internet satellite thing, and I think he might be beta testing it. But right now, satellite internet's not a very viable option. LTE data is much more available, much more energy efficient, and much easier to deal with. So in 5 years, it could be a totally different story. But right now, it's not a great option for internet.
Okay, awesome. Cass, you had mentioned kind of filling up at Walmarts for water and things like that. You had a picture of the 5-gallon jug there, so you would just use the machine in the front, put in the couple bucks, whatever it is, and is that where you get water from?
That is, yeah. A lot of grocery stores have them right outside, so you don't even have to go to the grocery store, which is great for COVID. A lot of times I will call around because some will have it, some won't. So I'll just call the Walmart or grocery store real quick, ask them. I've even seen it at Walgreens and things like that. Yep.
Cool. Jonathan, when you look at kind of questions here around, okay, awesome places to camp in national forests, BLM land, can you just park and camp anywhere, or what are some of the guidelines that you give folks on that topic?
Good question. Yeah. So that's one reason I think that a lot of us do sort of gravitate towards these online tools like Campinium or The Dirt. These are places that sort of are already established as campsites. And so we don't have to worry about that too much. We definitely have used, our overhead satellite view, or just started driving down roads or asking people, and we've definitely found spots. And I think the key is, especially for like public lands, is if it looks like someone has camped there before, it's probably okay. What you don't want to do is you don't want to pull your trailer up onto, some grass or an area where it looks like it should not be disturbed, basically. That's why it's called dispersed camping. Like, people have already been there. Usually there's like a ring of rocks where people have had a fire. So yeah, I think it is important to do your research, and there are, like you said, you can get a hold of the National Forest Office, or there's government agencies. If you're like super worried about it, you can contact them and say, hey, I'm at these GPS coordinates. Is this okay? And they probably will be able to tell you. And there's usually signs to say not to camp here. You know, so it's not completely the Wild West. You'd be surprised how much infrastructure there already is out in a lot of these places, because people try to get out and sometimes camp where they shouldn't. But yeah, I think if you're using these apps and you're doing your research, you know, and there's not big signs everywhere that say, hey, don't camp here, I think you should be okay.
Cool. All right, I'm going to try to squeeze in 2 more here. First one, show of hands. How many of you guys have lift kits on your Airstreams? 1,
We do.
2. Okay. All right, good to know. Just folks wondering things that they can do to make departure angles a little bit better. And then final question, Cass, this one's for you. Could you see us camping full-time in a base camp with a 2-year-old? For us, the smaller trailer, the better, the more outdoorsy, the better. We really like the base camp, you know, how wide's the bed, all that stuff. So could you imagine you, another person, and a little human?
So I have a 80-pound dog and a cat, and I would say I'm at max capacity. So when my boyfriend comes to visit, he is 6 foot tall, and the way that the base camp curve on the back, it does get a little bit tight. We sleep with our heads actually here towards the kitchen, and then you have to sleep at a little bit of an angle. Even though it's a king bed width-wise and full length-wise, that curve takes up a good amount of room. There is an Airstream base camp group, and there are some really creative ideas on there in how to split the benches and get a couple different beds and then sleep with the children as well. For weekend use or shorter trips, I think it would absolutely be easily doable. But for a long-term or full-time life with 2 adults and a human, baby human, I think it would be a little bit tight, especially with having to put the bed up and down every day to get to the table, things like that. There is the Base Camp 20, which I haven't seen in person yet, so I can't say for sure it would be better, but it has the 2 separate beds. So I would definitely take a look at that, because then you still get the Base Camp features, but 1 extra sleeping area.
Awesome. Well, I apologize to all the folks. I know that there are a bunch of questions here that we were not able to get to, but there's an email address on the screen. Promise if you send us a note, if we don't have the answer, we'll track it down with our panelists today. But really want to thank our panelists for spending part of their Saturday with us, and all the folks who joined us on the Zoom. If everyone would just take a moment to give us your feedback on the next screen, we'd love it. And we'll post this online to airstream.com. So thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.